Welcome back to Winning Souls for Christ, a radio show designed to teach, equip, and empower you for the mission of the new evangelization. I'm your host, Isaac Longworth, and today's show is actually the last show of this program, Winning Souls for Christ. So next week, I will be launching a brand new program called Heroes of the Faith. I'm going to be talking a little bit more at the end of this show about what that's going to look like. But for today's show, we're going to be talking about the identity of Jesus. Because evangelization is all about who Jesus is, right? It's introducing people to a life-changing encounter with him as Lord. And so we need to get this right. But who is he? Who is Jesus? And how can we invite people into a relationship with him that will not only answer their questions about who he is, but also convince them of the absolute necessity of putting him at the center of their lives? You see, as evangelists, it's very important for us that we're first able to know who Jesus is ourselves, or else we won't be able to do a very good job of introducing him to other people, right? We need to know who he is. And so the very first part of the show, we're actually going to start by talking about who Jesus is not. We're going to clear up some misconceptions about who Jesus was. Then we're going to delve into who Jesus actually is, his true identity. And finally, we're going to close with what all of this means for our own lives. So first, who Jesus is not. Second, who Jesus is. And third, why does it matter? So first, who Jesus is not. One of my favorite questions I've always said when I'm out evangelizing, whether I'm out on the streets, I'm on a university campus, my favorite question to ask people is this: who is Jesus to you? What's your opinion about him? Because everyone's got an opinion. I've asked this question to hundreds of different people, and I've received hundreds of different answers. Sometimes with people that are in a religious group or religious affiliation, they normally have a pretty hard definition of who Jesus is. So for instance, if I'm talking to a Muslim and I ask him, who is Jesus to you? He would probably respond, he's a prophet of God. He's a prophet of Allah. I was talking with a Jehovah's Witness on the other hand, and I said, who is Jesus? And she said, he's the first creation of God. He's an angel. So very different answers, but very definitive, dogmatic, hard answers. But there's also, with most people, especially with people that don't really belong to any religion, they're more agnostic, they'll have a softer, more flimsy opinion of who Jesus is. They'll say something like, well, he's something like a political activist. You know, he did some good for his people. He fought the religious authorities of his time. Some people say he's a moral teacher, that he taught us how to live. Others hypothesize that he was a philosopher, kind of this enlightened man, or a spiritual guru that was in touch with a higher power. So there's all these different answers, but that question, who is Jesus, is the fundamental, crucial question of evangelization, which is why even Jesus used it while he was here on earth. When he was with his apostles, he asked them, who do men say that the Son of Man is? And they answered, they said, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But Jesus wants to know what they think about him personally. So he asks them, but who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter replied, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Now, just like in the time of the disciples, when there was all these questions and theories about who Jesus was, in our time, there's a lot of these theories as well. And which one of them, we need to ask ourselves, if any, is the right answer? Well, C.S. Lewis, the famous Christian author who wrote The Chronicles of Narnia, Mere Christianity, amongst many other books, he answers what we should think about the identity of Jesus. This is what he writes. I am trying here to prevent anyone from saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. So C.S. Lewis is saying the only really foolish thing we can say about Jesus is that he was a great moral teacher, but that he wasn't God. And he goes on to explain why this is so foolish. He says that is the one thing we must not say. Because a man who was merely a man and said the sort of thing that Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. And here C.S. Lewis really gets to the point. He's very bold here. He says, you must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else he is a madman or something worse. Let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about him being a great human teacher, because he has not left that open to us. So C.S. Lewis is saying we can't say he's a great moral teacher. We either have to say he's the Son of God, he is what he said he was, or else he's crazy, he's a madman, or he's something worse, he's a liar. These are the only three options we have. Well, why is this, you might be wondering? Why can't Jesus just be a great teacher? Well, the main reason is because Jesus said he was more than just a great teacher. He said that he was God himself. When he was on trial right before his execution before the high priest, in Mark chapter 14, verse 61, the high priest asks Jesus, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?" This is what Jesus responded with. Jesus said, "I am," which right away would have clued in his Jewish audience that he's making a very bold claim here, because I am was the name that God had revealed in the burning bush to Moses. Yahweh, I am who am. So Jesus starts by saying, I am. He's got everyone's attention. And then he says, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. And in this, Jesus is referring to the prophecy made by the prophet Daniel. In Daniel chapter 7, Daniel has this vision of a Son of Man coming before God, and God gives this Son of Man glory and everlasting dominion, and all peoples and nations obey him forever. These are divine qualities: glory, everlasting dominion, all peoples obeying him. And Jesus is saying, I am that Son of Man. And the response of the high priest to this proclamation shows us the gravity of what Jesus was saying about himself. Because it goes on to say, and the high priest tore his garments, which was a Jewish form of expressing outrage and shock. And he said, why do we still need witnesses? You have heard his blasphemy. The high priest is saying, we don't need to carry this trial on any longer. This man has already made a divine claim about himself. This is blasphemy. The Jewish audience understood what Jesus was saying about himself, that he truly was the Son of God. And for Jesus to make such an audacious claim as this, he can be only one of three things. He's either a liar, he's a lunatic, or he is who he says he is. He is the Lord. So first of all, could Jesus just be a liar? Did he just make it all up? Maybe Jesus wanted to be worshipped as God, and so he made up this claim that he was God. Well, the problem with this is that it doesn't hold up once you see what actually happened to Jesus. Right? In Matthew chapter 14, verse 64, we see the response of the crowd to Jesus's divine claim about himself. It says they all condemned him as deserving death. And some began to spit on him and to cover his face and to strike him, saying to him, prophesy. And the guards received him with blows. The reaction of most of his people to this claim that he was God was not to fall down at his feet and worship him, but was to reject him, to eventually kill him. Jesus was received with rejection from his own people, from members of his own family. He lived a life of itinerant poverty, going from town to town with no place to rest his head, and eventually he was condemned to be crucified. Possibly the worst form of execution that we as humans have invented. This was what happened when Jesus claimed to be God. So he obviously didn't get what he was hoping to get if he was a liar. If he was a liar, he would have renounced his claims and just gone back to being a carpenter rather than going to the cross. So Jesus wasn't a liar. Well, maybe he was a lunatic. Maybe Jesus wasn't lying, he was just crazy. He thought he was God, and because of he was crazy, he couldn't see the danger that he was in by saying so. Maybe this is what happened. Well, the problem with this theory is that Jesus didn't present himself as a lunatic. In John chapter 7, verse 14, it says, Jesus went up into the temple and taught, and the Jews marveled at it, saying, how is it that this man has learning when he has never studied? So when Jesus is teaching and preaching, people are amazed at his wisdom, at his clarity. They're saying, how did he learn to speak this way? Where did he get this from? Now, this isn't what crowds normally say to lunatics. Normally, you can tell pretty clear that a lunatic is raving and not a man of wisdom. And this wasn't, of course, just Jesus' followers who saw this, because even in cults, you see a cult leader, even if he's crazy, his followers think he's very wise. But even Jesus' enemies recognized that he was an intellectual threat to them. They recognized that he was a smart guy. Because in Matthew chapter 22, verse 15, it says, the Pharisees went and took counsel how to entangle him in his talk. So the wise religious leaders, the scholars of the day, went to try and trick Jesus with their arguments. But after they tried to do so, it says, when they heard his answer, they marveled, and they left him and went away. So even his enemies recognize that this man isn't crazy. He's not a raving lunatic. He's something else. And so if Jesus wasn't a lunatic, and he wasn't a liar, then what does that leave us? Could he actually be who he said he was? Could he be the Lord? And of course, we know as Christians that this is who Jesus was, that he really was who he says he was, the Son of God. We already saw in his trial that Jesus claimed he was the divine Son of God. But you might be wondering, well, was that a one-off moment? Or was this something that he continually attested to throughout his ministry here on earth? And we see when we look at the life of Jesus that this is the case, that throughout his life here on earth, Jesus was showing people that he was God, that he was divine. For instance, in Mark chapter 2, verse 5, we see Jesus forgiving sins. It says, when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, my son, your sins are forgiven. Now think about that for a second. Jesus is forgiving sin. And who is sin an offense against? Well, sin is an offense against God. And so Jesus would only have the authority to forgive sin if he was God himself. Right? Think about it this way. If someone was to come up and punch me in the face, and you were to go over to that person who attacked me and said, I forgive you. Well, that wouldn't really mean anything, right? Because you weren't the one that was offended. I was the one that got punched in the face. I should be the one that offers forgiveness. So here's Jesus offering forgiveness for sin, which is an offense against God. And this is not missed by the scribes who are listening. Listen to what the scribes say. It says, now some of the scribes were sitting there, questioning in their hearts, why does this man speak thus? It is blasphemy. Who can forgive sins but God alone? So Jesus showed that he was God when he forgave sins. Jesus also in his lifetime accepted worship. It says, behold, Jesus met them and said, hail. And they came up and took a hold of his feet and worshiped him. So his apostles worship Jesus, and he welcomes and he accepts their worship, which is very, very different from other people in the Bible who were accidentally worshipped by people who were confused, and they stopped them. Like, for instance, Peter in Acts chapter 10, verse 25. Peter enters the house of Cornelius, and it says Cornelius met him and fell down at his feet and worshipped him. But Peter lifted him up, saying, stand up, I too am a man. Peter's saying, don't worship me, I'm not God. Whereas Jesus, when his followers worship him, he welcomes it and accepts it as something that he is owed because he is God himself. Of course, Jesus is also famous for performing miracles, demonstrating power over nature, stopping storms, performing many healings, even raising the dead, showing that he's Lord of life. And his miracles are different from all the other miracles of the Bible because he did it on his own authority. Because other people in the Bible have raised the dead. The prophet Elijah raised the dead in 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 21. But listen to how he does it. It says, Elijah stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried to the Lord, O Lord my God, let this child's life come into him again. And the Lord listened to the voice of Elijah. So Elijah is praying to God, saying, you bring this child back to life. And the Lord listens to him. Compare that with how Jesus raised the dead. In Luke chapter 7, verse 14, Jesus sees a funeral procession for a young man who's died, and he stops the procession, and this is what Jesus does. He said, young man, I say to you, arise. And the dead man sat up and began to speak. Do you see the difference? Elijah raises the dead by asking God to do it. Jesus raises the dead by saying, I say to you, arise. He does it on his own authority, showing his divine identity. And of course, Jesus' greatest miracle was his own resurrection. Not only did Jesus rise from the dead himself, but he prophesied before it would happen that he would die and that he would rise again on the 3rd day, which is exactly what happened, showing he also had knowledge of the future. So we don't have time to go over all the miracles of Jesus, all of his other divine claims throughout the Gospels, but it is clearly shown throughout the Gospels that Jesus believed that he was God and backed it up with signs and wonders. Well, at this point, you may be thinking, okay, Jesus truly is God. So what? What does this have to do with my life? Well, it makes a huge difference, and here's why. If Jesus is God, then it makes all the difference in the world for us, because Jesus, as God, came to earth and personally offers every single human being a chance at salvation that requires a response from us. Jesus said in John chapter 14, verse 6, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but by me. Jesus says that he is the only way to have peace with God, the only way to right relationship with our Father in heaven. It is an exclusive path to God, and that is through Jesus. There is no other name by which we can be saved. Jesus claims that we need to build our lives on what he says, that our lives need to be founded on his word, or else nothing will last. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 26, he tells this parable of construction builders building houses. And this is what he says, everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house upon the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the wind blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. Jesus is saying, if you build your life on anything other than my words, your life is going to fall apart and nothing will remain. These are bold things to say, right? And you can see that in the response of the crowd when Jesus says that. It says, when Jesus finished these sayings, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one who had authority. This bold claim that Jesus is saying, you need to build your life upon my word or it's meaningless. This holds true for us as well. What is our response to Jesus saying that we need to build our life upon his words or else it's meaningless? Finally, Jesus taught that those who put their faith in him will be saved and not condemned for their sins. In John chapter 3, verse 18, Jesus says that he who believes in him is not condemned. He who does not believe is condemned already. So he who believes in him is not condemned. He who believes in Jesus isn't under the condemnation of sin. But he who does not believe is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the only Son of God. That's a stark reality, that there is no other name by which we can be saved. Jesus is the only way to heaven. Every single human being has sinned, except for Jesus and Mary. All of us have sinned. We've fallen short of the standard of holiness that God requires for us to get into heaven. And yet, if we believe in Jesus, we are not under that condemnation. We have been saved. But this is the call, of course, of the gospel, that we need to tell people about Jesus. We need to tell them that the only way that they can reach heaven is by the salvation that Jesus offers. He is the only way, which makes our need to preach the gospel so important, and the need to respond with faith and repentance to the Lord Jesus' offer so imperative. There's only two options, heaven and hell. Every single human being will end up in one of those two places, heaven or hell. And the ones who will be in heaven will be the ones that put their faith in Jesus. It's a very important message that we need to take to heart. Knowing the true identity of Jesus, who he actually is, the divine Son of God, that forces us to make a decision one way or the other. We can't remain neutral in the face of Jesus. Like I said, there's heaven and hell. There's those who are for Jesus and there's those that are against him. There is no in between. And that's what evangelization is all about. Introducing people to the real Jesus, the authentic Jesus. He's not just a prophet, not just a moral teacher. He's not a spiritual guru or a good guy who was ahead of his times. No. Jesus was the Son of God. He is the Son of God, who came to earth to die on our behalf so that we, as sinful humanity, could have our broken relationship with God restored. Evangelization is about bringing people into an encounter with this living Jesus, presenting them with an opportunity to accept him as the Lord of their life. I was at a university once talking with students passing by, and I asked this one student who he thought Jesus was. And he said, not maliciously at all, he just said, I have no opinion about Jesus. He makes no difference in my life. I haven't thought about it. And I told him some of these things. I told him about who Jesus was. I told him about the necessity of putting our faith in him, putting our lives on his word in order to be saved. And I pressed him to make a decision. I said, look, we don't know how long we have here on this earth. The time to make this decision is now. Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call on him while he's near. Look into this as a thinking adult. You can't go through your life without having an opinion about Jesus. You need to make a choice either for him or against him. And I hope and I pray, my friend, I told him, that you make that choice for him. And I'll be praying that you do. This is our call. This is what we as baptized Christians are called to tell the world. That Jesus is the way to heaven. That he is who he said he is. And that we can have eternal joy in heaven. That we can have peace with our Heavenly Father. That we can be in heaven for all eternity, rejoicing with the angels and saints if we just put our faith in Jesus. As mentioned earlier, this is the last show for the program, and it's been an amazing opportunity to share Winning Souls for Christ with you, to share my heart for evangelization, and I wanted to end with this identity of Jesus because this is the message of the gospel. This is what all of you are supposed to be sharing with people as committed Catholics. So I hope that this show has taught, equipped, and empowered you for the work of the new evangelization so that you can go out and set the world on fire for Jesus. As I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I'll be here next week, same time, with a new program called Heroes of the Faith. Heroes of the Faith will be focused on telling the lives of the saints in a way that will hopefully inspire us to become saints ourselves. So I Really hope that you can check this out next Friday, same time, 5 to 5:30 Eastern, here on Radio Maria. God bless you all, and hopefully see you next week.